I remember the sound before the pain. It wasn't a crash at first. It was a hum, a faint, trembling hum beneath my feet that didn't belong to the road. I had driven that same route for 20 years, the two-lane stretch behind the lake, the one that curves like a question mark through the pines. I could drive it blindfolded. That morning I almost did. The steering wheel trembled. Then came the silence, the kind of silence that folds the air before everything breaks. When the brakes gave out, the world stopped negotiating. The car slid across gravel, a shriek of metal, the taste of iron and dirt filling my mouth. There was a moment of weightlessness, a second where I wasn't falling or flying, just existing between choices already made by someone else's hands. Then came the crash. When I opened my eyes, I saw my reflection in the shattered windshield. Not my whole face, just fragments. A bleeding cheek. A single intact eye. I remember thinking how strange it was that the body still fights to live even when the heart has already surrendered to disbelief. The rescue came quickly. Sirens in the distance. Hands pulling. Voices fading. Someone said, "He's still breathing." And I thought, unfortunately, when I woke up in the hospital, I could hear the machines before I saw the room. Beeping in rhythm. Oxygen hiss. A plastic taste in the back of my throat. White curtains fluttering like ghosts. They told me I had been unconscious for almost 12 hours. Broken ribs. A fractured arm. Internal bruising. Miracle, the nurse whispered. You're lucky to be alive. I smiled, or maybe grimaced. Because luck wasn't what brought me back, it was unfinished business. Joshua came to see me 2 days later. He looked composed, polished, a rehearsed kind of grief. He sat beside the bed, placed his hand on mine, and said all the right things. Dad, I thought I lost you. I've been praying. I'll handle everything at the office, don't worry. But grief, when rehearsed, has a rhythm. And somewhere between his words, there was a beat too steady to be real. I built my life on control. Every decision measured, every risk calculated. I started from nothing, an old garage, 2 tools, and a vision. My first factory was smaller than my kitchen is now. I worked 16 hours a day for decades, built an empire on reliability. And yet, the thing I couldn't calculate was the corrosion inside the walls of my own home. Joshua was my only child, my pride and my weakness. I'd given him everything too soon: keys, titles, trust. I used to say, a man's legacy isn't what he leaves behind. It's who he leaves it to. And I believed it. I believed in him. Until that morning, 3 days after the accident, a detective visited the hospital. His face was neutral, the kind of neutrality that hides bad news. He carried a clipboard and spoke softly, like he was trying to bury every word before it reached me. We've completed the preliminary analysis, he said. The brakes didn't fail naturally. I stared at him. He hesitated. There are signs of deliberate tampering. The line was cut clean professionally. My mind didn't race. It didn't scream. It didn't even resist. It just paused. Because deep down I already knew. The universe doesn't whisper truth, it repeats it until you finally stop pretending you can't hear. I asked who had access. He listed a few names from the house, the garage, the mechanic shop. Then he added quietly, your son's name appears in one of the mechanic's call logs. Multiple times, 2 weeks prior. I didn't ask more. I just looked out the window and watched a leaf detach from a branch, slow, weightless, inevitable. That night, when the lights dimmed and the hallway went quiet, I thought about every sign I had ignored. The way Joshua had grown impatient when I delayed handing over full control of the company. The sudden interest in my estate planning. The subtle disrespect disguised as confidence. The tone he used when he thought success was his birthright, not my labor. And the way he had said don't worry in the hospital, as if it were a command. It wasn't anger that filled me, it was clarity. Anger burns fast. Clarity lingers. On the fifth night, the nurse left the television on. Some late-night program about inheritance disputes. I remember a man on the screen saying, "The worst betrayal is the one that convinces you it was love." I turned off the TV because I didn't need reminders. I was living the episode. I thought of his mother, gone 15 years now. She used to say Joshua had her eyes, but my stubbornness. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had built him too much in my image. Maybe he learned that power isn't inherited, it's taken. When I was discharged, I went home to an empty house. It was a museum of what once mattered: portraits, awards, the faint smell of old wood polish. Every object suddenly meaningless. Joshua had sent flowers. Roses. Red. A strange choice, considering I'm allergic to them. I left them on the porch. That night, I poured myself a drink, sat in the dark, and listened to the house breathe. Old wood creaks differently when you've learned what silence really means. I picked up a photo from the mantel: Joshua at age 10, smiling with missing teeth, holding the first bicycle I ever bought him. I remember the day clearly. He had fallen 3 times before riding straight. Each time, he'd yell, "Don't hold me, Dad. Let me go." And when I finally did, he rode away without looking back. It was meant to be a proud memory. Now it felt prophetic. The next morning, I called my lawyer. He asked, "Are you sure you're ready to discuss business already?" I said, "It's not business. It's justice." He paused. "What kind of justice?" "The kind that teaches what love failed to." That week, the investigators closed the case. Not enough evidence for criminal prosecution. The mechanic vanished. His shop mysteriously sold. Joshua denied everything with convincing calm. He even held a family dinner to celebrate my recovery. I went. I smiled. I raised a glass. To everyone else, it looked like reconciliation. But it was a eulogy for the version of me that believed in him. When I looked across the table, I saw not a son, but a stranger rehearsing affection. He laughed too loudly, complimented me too often. And when I caught his eye, just for a second, I saw it: fear hiding behind politeness. That was all I needed. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't shout, didn't accuse, didn't demand confessions. Because shouting gives the guilty something to fight against. Silence gives them something to fear. Instead, I began observing. Every move, every inconsistency, every performance. When people betray you for money, they always underestimate what you'll do once you realize that money means nothing. One morning, I stood at the lake behind my house. The mist rose slowly, the air cold against my skin. The reflection in the water looked older than I remembered, fragile but free. And I thought, if greed can make a son plan his father's death, then perhaps love must take an equal sacrifice to balance the scales. That was the morning I decided to give it all away. Not in rage, not in despair, but in coherence. I contacted charities quietly. Schools I had once funded. Hospitals I'd helped build. I started restructuring everything not as punishment, but as purification. When you lose everything that can be taken from you, what remains is who you truly are. I was finally ready to find out who that was. That same day, Joshua called. He wanted to talk about transition plans for the company. I told him we would meet soon. He didn't notice the calm in my voice. He didn't hear that the storm was already over. Because the real storm isn't the crash. It's the moment you stand up afterward and realize that survival was just the beginning of judgment. And as I looked around that empty mansion, the empire he had tried to inherit through deceit, I felt a peace so sharp it almost hurt. Because peace, when earned through truth, cuts deeper than revenge ever could. There's a kind of silence that doesn't need darkness to exist. It's not the absence of sound. It's the absence of meaning. That's what filled the hospital room after the investigators left. Machines hummed, nurses spoke. The world moved, but nothing felt real anymore. I would close my eyes and see fragments of glass still suspended in the air. They would fall slowly, endlessly, like frozen seconds refusing to pass. Every blink replayed the crash, the slide, the shatter, the jolt. But it wasn't the pain that haunted me. It was the thought that someone I loved had planned it. It's one thing to lose control of your car. It's another to lose control of your faith in your own blood. The nights were long. I barely slept. The pain medication numbed my body, but not my mind. When the morphine wore off, the memories returned with precision. Joshua, at 13, stubborn, clever, fearless. Joshua, at 25, ambitious, impatient, already talking like a man who owned everything he hadn't earned. And me, always defending him, always saying he'll mature. He just needs time. Time, that's what I gave him. And time, apparently, is what he used to plot my end. One evening, a nurse walked in holding the dinner tray. Her name tag said Margaret. She was in her 60s, soft voice, gentle eyes. She looked at me with a kind of pity I hadn't seen before. "Mr. Sir," she said, hesitating, "your son called earlier. He wanted to know when you'd be discharged." Her tone lingered on your son, as if the word no longer fit the sentence. I nodded, pretending not to care. But her voice lingered in my chest long after she left. I began noticing small things. How my hand shook when I reached for the cup of water. How the clock seemed to tick louder every night. How my reflection in the metal frame looked less like a survivor and more like an empty frame itself. I had built an empire through discipline and endurance. But none of that prepared me for the emotional surgery of betrayal. There's no anesthesia for realizing your child would rather see you dead than see you in control. On the 10th night, I dreamed of the lake. I saw myself standing at the edge, holding two stones, one marked legacy, the other love. In the dream, I had to throw one away. I stood there frozen, unable to choose. Then, from somewhere behind me, Joshua's voice whispered, "Don't worry, Dad. I already chose for you." When I woke, the pillow was wet. I don't remember crying. Days blurred together. Visitors came and went, employees, neighbors, distant relatives. They all spoke with the same tone, relief mixed with curiosity. "How are you feeling? Do you remember what happened? What will you do now?" None of them asked the real, questioned the one that hovered like fog. Who did this to you? Maybe they already knew. Or maybe they were too afraid to imagine that kind of darkness living under the same roof. A week before my discharge, I received a bouquet. No card this time. Just a single white lily in the center of red roses. White for purity. Red for guilt. Joshua never understood symbols. But I did. I taught him once that every action has a color. Every decision has a shade. Now his choices painted themselves clearly in my mind, crimson and cold. The doctor came in for the final evaluation. "You're healing faster than expected," he said, "but you'll need to avoid stress." I laughed softly. "Stress? I think that's already been taken care of." He smiled politely, unaware that I meant it literally. When they wheeled me out of the hospital, the sunlight felt foreign, too bright, too honest. Like it was trying to reveal something I wasn't ready to face. Joshua stood by the car, holding the door open. He had chosen my favorite suit for me, or perhaps for himself. He looked immaculate, groomed, perfectly composed. "Let's get you home, Dad," he said. His voice had the same tone as the detective's clipboard, cautious neutrality. I nodded, climbed in slowly. The leather seat felt unfamiliar, though it was mine. He drove carefully, too carefully, as if he were playing the part of a dutiful son. But I noticed the small things, how he avoided eye contact at red lights, how his grip tightened on the steering wheel, how he exhaled in relief every time I stayed silent. Silence became my language. And guilt understands silence better than words. When we reached the house, he helped me out and carried the bag inside. The air smelled of lemon polish and staged comfort. Everything was in its place except truth. He asked, "Do you want me to stay tonight?" I replied, "No, son. Go rest. You've done enough." He smiled, mistaking my words for gratitude. He didn't realize they were a verdict. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the bedroom. I sat by the fireplace instead, wrapped in a blanket, watching the flames consume with the same way betrayal consumes memory, slow, beautiful, and final. Each flicker of orange reminded me of moments I once thought eternal. His first steps on that old carpet, his laughter echoing through this same hall, the way he'd sit beside me after school and ask how engines worked. Now every spark was a goodbye. I thought about pressing charges, about calling the detective back, about making the law speak where conscience had failed. But then I realized the law could punish his actions, not his intentions. And intentions are the real crime. So I chose something deeper than punishment, something cleaner. Justice without blood. In those quiet hours before dawn, I began writing letters. Not to him, not yet. To myself. To the man I was before the crash, the man who believed love and loyalty were unbreakable. I wrote, "You were wrong. But being wrong doesn't mean being ruined." I wrote, "You can lose your wealth, your body, your trust, but never your truth." And finally, I wrote, "Do not seek revenge. Seek coherence." When I finished, I folded the letter and placed it inside the drawer of my desk. It wasn't a goodbye note. It was a compass. The next morning, I went outside for the first time without assistance. The wind was sharp. The world smelled new, even though nothing had changed. Birds flew low over the lake, their reflections almost perfect on the surface. I stood there for a long time, breathing. And for the first time since the accident, I felt gratitude. Not for survival, but for clarity. The kind of clarity that only catastrophe can gift. Over the next few weeks, I moved slowly, quietly. I declined business meetings, ignored investors, postponed everything. People assumed I was resting. But rest was not what I needed. I needed to listen to the silence between my thoughts, to the echoes of decisions that had brought me here. Every empire, no matter how vast, eventually demands an audit of the soul. Mine had come due. One afternoon, while sorting through old papers, I found a letter from Joshua's late mother. The ink had faded, but her words hadn't. If he ever loses his way, remind him that love isn't inherited, it's learned. Teach him to earn what he already thinks he deserves. I read that line over and over until my hands trembled, because I had failed to teach him that. And now I would have to, not with lectures, not with anger, but with consequences. As the 30 days of recovery passed, my body healed faster than expected, but my trust did not. Each step I took, without pain, felt like a small resurrection. And each time I crossed the hallway, past the family portraits, I saw something new. Not a dynasty, a warning. Legacy without morality is just inheritance without meaning. And I finally understood. Perhaps the greatest gift I could give my son was the loss of everything he took for granted. The day I called my lawyer, I didn't feel rage. I felt precision. "I need to rewrite everything," I said. "Everything?" he asked. "Yes. The company, the estate, the holdings, the will." He hesitated. "That's a lot to change. May I ask why?" I smiled faintly. "Because I just survived a rehearsal for my funeral. It's time to decide what my real one will look like." He said nothing for a moment. Then softly, "I'll prepare the documents." When I hung up, I stared at my reflection in the window. Behind me, the sunset poured amber light across the room, touching the old photographs, the trophies, the books I hadn't opened in years. Everything I'd built shimmered in that golden glow, and I realized it all meant nothing if it couldn't survive truth. That's when peace settled in. Quiet, heavy, undeniable. Because sometimes justice isn't fire, it's light. And as that light dimmed into evening, I whispered to myself what would become the mantra of the next chapter of my life. He took my trust to buy his freedom. Now I'll give away my fortune to buy mine. I didn't wake up that morning planning to become a different man. I woke to the same sound I had heard for years, the soft breath of the house, the hush of the trees outside, the distant groan of trucks taking the state road toward the mills. The world pretended nothing had changed. Only I refused to keep pretending. Coffee steamed in the kitchen. It smelled like habit and time. I poured it into the chip mug I had kept from the early years, the one with the faded logo from my first shop when everything felt honest, because it was small. I wrapped my hands around the warmth and stared out at the lake. The surface was gray, ribbed by a light wind. I watched a single gull trace the shoreline like it was reading the water for news. It found nothing and flew on. My phone vibrated on the counter. A calendar reminder. The board check-in. Joshua had scheduled it. I could have canceled. I could have said I needed one more week. No, one would have argued. The near-dead are rarely expected to be punctual. But I put on a clean shirt, the kind I used to wear on days when a contract needed to be signed and confidence had to be worn like a tie. I drove myself, slowly, to the office park that once felt like a monument and now felt like the memory of one. The lobby smelled of eucalyptus and new carpet. The receptionist glanced at me with real concern. "It's good to see you," she said. Her voice carried the soft kind of respect that has nothing to do with money. I nodded. I didn't linger. I pressed the elevator button and watched the floor numbers rise, as if the building were measuring my resolve. The boardroom door stood open. Laughter spilled out, the kind of laughter that buys time. Joshua was at the head of the table. He was telling a story about the early days, the garage, the grit, my stubbornness. He told it well. People like a myth when it has a roof and payroll. Then he saw me. For a fraction of a second his eyes widened. Then he smiled with perfect warmth. "There he is," he said, stepping forward, arms outstretched. Stronger than the bricks he built. I let him hug me. It was a careful embrace, the kind two actors share when the stage is slippery. "Sit here," he said, pulling out the chair beside him. Not the head. Beside. I took it. The meeting began with updates. Sales. Supply. Staffing. The charts moved like tides, up and down, predictable. I listened to the numbers like they were wind in a wheat field. Useful, sure, but not the harvest. Then Joshua clicked to a slide labeled succession timeline. The room adjusted itself. Chairs. Throats. Pens. He spoke evenly, like a pilot describing turbulence that would be brief. "For continuity," he said, "we'll transition key operational control by end of quarter. Legal and fiduciary authority by the end of year, assuming health indicators remain stable." No one looked at me. They looked at the slide. Easier to face a font than a father. "Health indicators," I said softly. It was not a question. Joshua kept his eyes on the room. "Only a framework. We want what's best for you. Best for me." The same phrasing a salesman uses when you can't hear the price. I let the vocabulary float past. "And the estate plan?" I asked. The question landed like a coin on a glass table. Joshua kept his posture. "We'll align any updates with the transition. A press statement would help stabilize the market." A press statement. Stabilize. Align. The words stacked up like boxes filled with nothing. "Good," I said. "Let's conclude, then." His head tilted, small and quick, the habit of a man who hates uncertainty the way others fear heights. He wanted the meeting to end on his terms, with his slide, his timeline, his script. I closed the binder, stood, thanked the board, and left. In the corridor, my steps echoed. I felt an old ache in the ribs and placed a palm flat against them until the ache became a memory again. I passed the framed photos of grand openings and ribbon cuttings, the handshakes with men in suits who had promised forever and delivered until someone else promised more. At the end of the hall, a window overlooked the loading docks. Forklifts hummed and beeped as they choreographed pallets into trucks. I watched the operations for a long time. Precision, repetition, trust. 9 people I did not know moved like a single body. That was the business I had fallen in love with. Motion that meant something. Downstairs, I avoided the elevator and took the stairs into the plant. Oil and iron and heat. The smell of work. A foreman with a gray beard noticed me and pulled off his gloves. "You shouldn't be on the floor," he said, not unkindly. "The docs say you can handle this noise yet." "It's the only part that sounds honest," I said. He smiled with half his mouth. Always did. We walked the line together in silence. Sparks rattled in a cage of light and disappeared. Pistons rose and fell. A woman adjusted a gauge and frowned the way a musician frowns when a note is almost right. I asked the foreman how long he'd been here. 28 years, he said. "Since your second building. The leaky one." He laughed. "You mocked with us." "I remember," I said. "Because I did." My back still did. At the exit, he hesitated. "Glad you made it," he said. He didn't ask what he must have wanted to ask. He knew the difference between concern and intrusion. "Whatever they say upstairs," he added. "Down here we still build what's put in our hands." I nodded. "That's the plan," I said, though he could not have known what I meant. Outside, the winter light was thin. I stood with it. I watched a truck pull away and leave 2 clean tracks in the dust. The air tasted faintly of metal. I remembered the taste of iron in my mouth when the windshield had broken. Some flavors never let you forget what they taught you. On my way home, I avoided the lake road. I took the long route through town, past the brick library, the flagpole, the diner with the crooked sign that had never been straightened because everyone agreed it would look wrong if it did. I stopped at a light and saw, on the community board, a flyer I had seen 100 times and never read. The church was collecting for a shelter 2 towns over. I rolled down the window and took the number with my eyes. I didn't write it down. I wanted to see whether memory would carry it without help. At home, the house exhaled around me. I set my keys in the bowl by the door. They sounded like an admission. I hung up my jacket and walked to the study. On the desk, the letter to myself waited in the right-hand drawer, folded like a quiet directive. I did not open it. The words were inside me now, arranged like ribs around the organ that needed protecting. I called my lawyer. He answered on the second ring. "You were right," I said. "About what?" "About the will. We do everything." Now, he did not ask why. He knew I had reached the point beyond explanation. "Come tomorrow," he said, "and bring nothing but time." I was about to end the call when I added, "and discretion." "Assumed," he said. After I hung up, the phone rang immediately. Joshua. The screen lit his name in a font I suddenly hated. I let it ring 4 times, then answered. "You left early," he said. "Everything all right?" "Fine," I said. "You handled it." "I tried," he said, making the words sound valiant. "We should meet. One-on-one. I have some drafts for the announcement. I want your voice in it." "My voice," I repeated. "Tomorrow is no good." "For how long?" he asked. "For as long as it takes," I said, and ended the call gently, so he could tell himself I was tired, not certain. Night fell like a slow curtain. I didn't light the lamps. I stood in the dark and let my eyes adjust to the shapes the house kept when no one asked it to shine. A floorboard popped near the hallway. Houses talk if you let them. At some hour between the two that matter, I opened a box I had not opened in 15 years. Inside were 3 things: a photograph of the first shop with the paint still wet on the door, an old ledger with pencil entries from days when cash and patience kept the lights on, and a plain brass key with no label. The key belonged to a storage unit I had kept through habit more than need. I had put away there the remains of a life that had not been invited into the mansion. It was not treasure. It was proof. The next morning, I drove to that unit. A man at the counter recognized me and pretended he didn't. I pretended with him. The metal door groaned up and revealed a small museum of solutions. Shelves, plastic bins, the hand tools I could not bear to throw away, the duffel I used when the shop had no heat, an envelope of receipts, so old they felt like leaves. I sat on an overturned crate and opened the ledger. The pages smelled of graphite and sweat. I ran a fingertip under numbers that once felt like cliffs. Rent late. Paid anyway. Machine repair. Borrowed spare. Supplier debt. Settled with labor. I closed the book and placed it in the duffel. I opened another bin and found a note my wife had written in the year before she died. She had taped it to the inside of my lunch pail, and I had saved it because I could not eat the words and would not throw them away. Find the good fight, it read. Not the loud one, the good one. I folded the note and slid it into my pocket. I stood, locked the unit, and waited in the cold for no reason except to feel the weather choose me the way I had spent a lifetime choosing the weather for others. On the way to my lawyer's office, I stopped at the church whose number I had memorized. The donation bins were in the fellowship hall. It smelled like coffee and floor wax and old wood. A woman at a folding table glanced up and said hello in the way a person says hello when her day is not improved by yours, and yet she means the welcome anyway. I told her I wanted to talk to whoever coordinated the shelter fund. She took me to a man with sleeves rolled to the forearms and a pen tucked behind his ear. What do you need? He asked. To give, I said. He waited. Significant, I added. He did not thank me. He nodded like a carpenter measuring a beam. Tell me why, he said. Because I've been spared, I said, surprising myself with the truth. And because there are things in this world that money fixes and things it ruins. I want to stop letting it do the second. He tapped the pen against a pad. Anonymous or public? He asked. For now, anonymous, I said. Later, not. I felt the decision cross my face like a shadow, then light. Later, very not. We arranged the mechanisms. Funds. Oversight. No plaques. Accountability without applause. When we finished, he shook my hand and said, "You'll sleep differently." It did not sound like a blessing. It sounded like a fact. At the lawyer's office, the conference room smelled like paper and lemon. He had spread out folders, tabs, drafts, contingencies. He adjusted his glasses the way surgeons arrange light. We start with the will, he said. Then trusts. Then the board resolutions. Then the letters. The letters, I said. You will have to explain to those who believe they are owed, he replied. Explanation is not apology, but clarity prevents lawsuits. We worked all morning. We broke only for water and the kind of silence that separates decisions from their consequences. I signed, initialed, confirmed, revoked, established, endowed. The mechanics of moral change look a lot like bureaucracy because men put signatures where their courage should be and hope the ink will hold. By late afternoon, the plan existed in ink and law. 95% of my fortune routed into a foundation with a mandate that had nothing to do with my family name and everything to do with usefulness. Schools, clinics, scholarships for hands that build, programs for people who rise before the sun because hunger does, safeguards to ensure that no steward could turn it into a monument, a board chaired by strangers who knew work better than networking. 5% remained for me. Enough not to starve, not enough to tempt. And your son, the lawyer asked finally, like a doctor broaching the subject he had been trained to name without flinching. Excluded, I said. Explicitly. He will contest, the lawyer said. He will attempt, I corrected. We can include a no contest clause. If he challenges, he forfeits the small bequests. There are none, I said. The lawyer adjusted his glasses again. Then the clause becomes a warning, not a trap. Good, I said. Warnings are for the living. Traps are for the frightened. We drafted a letter to Joshua. Short, not bitter, not cruel, clear. I declined to read it aloud. I would save my voice for a moment when it would matter. At the end of the day, the lawyer leaned back and studied me the way a craftsman steps away to see if the table will stand without his hands. "There's one more choice," he said. "Private or public?" "Public," I said. "Are you?" "Sure." "Yes." "Why?" "Because secrecy protected him. Light will educate him." He closed the folder. Then we schedule the announcement, the reading, the resolutions. Invite the board. Invite whomever you wish. Do it in a room built for listening. I left the office with my copy of the documents in a plain envelope. On the street, the evening had turned the town gold. Students crossed against the light. A mother tugged a child's sleeve, and the child laughed because he had resisted for the pleasure of being guided. A bus sighed at the curb. Life moved, indifferent to the arithmetic I had just performed. It comforted me to know that I had chosen a fight small enough to win, because it did not require the world to change with me. At home, I laid the envelope on the desk and opened the window. Cold air rolled in across the floor. I let it. I wanted to feel the draft and not fix it. Not every discomfort requires repair. Some discomforts restore circulation. When the phone rang again, I did not look at the screen. I answered and said, "Yes." Joshua exhaled like a man who had been underwater and found the surface. "I drafted a statement," he said quickly, "about your recovery, about the transition plan. I put in a line about your resilience. People like that. It signals continuity." "Send it," I said. He did. It arrived with a chime. I read it. It was polished. It contained my name too many times. It turned survival into a brand message. It called me a cornerstone, so that he could be the building. "I'll make some edits," I said. "Sure," he replied, cheerful. "But soon. Timing matters." "Very soon," I said and hung up. I opened a new document and wrote 3 sentences. I removed my name from 2 of them. I took out the word legacy. I added a line about stewardship that did not point to an heir, but to a responsibility. I pressed save, then delete, and watched it vanish. I would not lend my voice to a preface for theft. That night, sleep came like a bargain kept. I dreamed of my wife at the top of the shop stairs. She was younger than the last time I had seen her, and she held the lunch pail with the note still taped inside. She did not speak. She set the pail on the railing and nodded at the floor where I had once mopped beside 3 men who had no health insurance and worked anyway because they believed that most dignities are self-issued. I walked down the stairs in the dream and picked up the mop, and when I looked back up she was gone, and I did not grieve because the floor needed finishing. Morning carried the kind of blue that makes windows honest. I spent the first hour writing a list titled The Good Fight. It had nothing to do with courtrooms. It had to do with kitchens and clinics and classrooms and cots and gymnasiums. I wrote until the list stopped being items and started being a map. Then I put down the pen. I called the attorney and gave him the date. He paused because he understood what dates do. They turn intentions into events. "We'll reserve the town hall," he said, "not the corporate auditorium. The town hall holds memory better." "Invite the board," I said, "and the department heads, and the press." I could hear the pen moving. "And invite Joshua," I added, though we both knew he would come on instinct. "We will read everything then." "You could do it with less theater," the lawyer said gently. "This isn't theater," I said. "This is a blackboard. I am writing the lesson large enough to be read from the back row." After the call, I sat with the quiet a long time. The house was so still it made the clock seem proud of itself. I glanced at the mantel where the photograph of 10-year-old Joshua still leaned against the frame of a landscape we had bought because it looked like a place we could have walked and never had. I picked up the photograph and held it at arm's length until my eyes watered. Then I set it face down. Not a punishment. A pause. The day before the announcement, a thin rain threaded the town. I drove to the mechanic's old shop. A for lease sign hung crooked in the window. I stood under the awning and watched the rain bulge on the metal edge and drop in perfect spheres onto the cracked sidewalk. I had no desire to find the man. Some truths do not need names to be true. On my way back, I stopped at the diner with the crooked sign. The waitress brought coffee without asking because she had a memory for the kinds of men who return to their old tables when decisions require starch. She set down the mug and said, "You look like a man who knows what he's doing and doesn't like that he knows it." "I look like a man who prefers tools to words," I said. "Same thing if you use them right," she replied, and left me with the steam. I ate slowly. Eggs. Toast. The food did the small mercies food sometimes does. It reminded me that bodies are maintained by simple agreements. I paid cash and left a tip folded like a small tent. Outside, the rain had thinned to mist. If you stood very still, you could feel it decide between falling and staying held by the air. At home, I ironed a shirt I rarely wore. I do not know why. Maybe to ask my hands to remember another kind of heat. I placed my wallet, my keys, and a small paper card on the dresser. The card held the time of the town hall reservation and the order of proceedings. Legal first. Then the foundation charter. Then my remarks, which would not be remarks, but a story told without names. I practiced not saying his. I stood in front of the mirror and said father and son without the anchors most stories demand. The mirror offered no advice. Mirrors only show you whether your face can carry what your voice intends. That night, I did not dream. I lay awake and counted the seconds between the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the clock, and found that the rhythm had become bearable. At some hour closer to mourning the night, I understood that I had crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. The moment when a victim stops arranging his pain and starts arranging his life again is not loud. It is the soft click of a door that locks from the inside. I stood, walked to the window, and drew the curtain. The sky was the color of steel that had not yet met flame. The lake lay flat, a sheet of unmarked slate, ready for the first sentence of the day. I pressed my finger to the glass and traced a line only I could see. Enough, I thought. Not with anger, with measure. The morning of a reading, the town woke with that particular brightness that only comes after a rain has scrubbed the air. I put on the iron shirt. I put the envelope in the inside pocket of my jacket. I took the photograph of the first shop and slid it behind the envelope, not as protection, but as reminder. I picked up my keys and felt their weight and understood it for what it was, the past yielding the door. On the porch, I locked the house and pocketed the key. It was a practiced motion that felt new. A neighbor waved from across the street. I waved back. The world was not different. I was. I walked down the steps and toward the car and toward the town hall and toward a room that would hold silence, and then words, and then a different silence after the words had done what they were built to do. I did not feel brave. I felt accurate. And accuracy, finally, would be my justice. The town hall looked smaller than I remembered. It had hosted years of parades and petitions, the kind of civic life that leaves a faint scent of dust and promises on its wooden walls. The janitor was sweeping the foyer when I arrived. He nodded, and I nodded back, two men understanding each other without ceremony. Inside, the long table had been set with a carafe of water, legal folders, and 2 microphones. My lawyer arranged his notes with the precision of a surgeon. Across the room, the press adjusted their cameras. Reporters were murmuring about why a private businessman would make a public declaration here instead of at his own headquarters. They didn't know that headquarters had lost its meaning. Joshua arrived late. Of course he did. Punctuality, to him, had always been a form of submission. He entered with that confident half-smile that had once made investors trust him instantly. His suit was immaculate, his handshake rehearsed. He whispered to one of the reporters, as if this were just another launch. I wondered if he realized he was about to witness the dismantling of the very stage he had been performing on. When the doors closed, the room quieted. The lawyer rose. His voice was steady and formal. "This meeting concerns the estate and business affairs of," he paused, then looked toward me, "our client." He gestured for me to stand. I did, slowly, letting the sound of my chair scraping the floor settle before I spoke. "I asked for this room because I wanted ordinary acoustics," I began. "No echo chambers, no microphones that distort meaning. Just wood, air, and the truth." People leaned forward. Joshua's smile faltered for a heartbeat. "You all know I survived an accident last month," I continued. "It reminded me that ownership is a temporary fiction. We hold things only as long as our breath allows. So today, I'm rewriting the fiction." The lawyer opened the folder. "As of this morning," he read, 95% of the client's personal and corporate assets have been transferred into an independent foundation dedicated to public service education, medical relief, and employment initiatives." A whisper spread through the room like wind through dry leaves. Joshua frowned. "You're donating the company," he said, the tone halfway between disbelief and panic. "No," I said. "I'm returning it to the people who built it." He laughed, short and sharp. "That's insane. You can't." I lifted a hand. "I can. And I have. Every signature, every clause, witnessed and sealed." He stood. "This isn't how we agreed to transition." I looked at him then. "We never agreed. You assumed." A ripple of quiet admiration moved through the board. The lawyer continued reading, detailing the safeguards, the trustees, the irrevocable nature of the foundation. Each word was a nail closing a door Joshua had once thought open. When it was over, I faced him fully. "Joshua," I said softly, "I built this company so you would never have to beg another man for purpose. I see now I built it so large you forgot what purpose was." His jaw tightened. "You think this is justice? You've destroyed me." "No," I said. "You did that yourself. I'm just giving the ruins meaning." He stepped closer, voice trembling. "You don't have proof of anything. You can't accuse me." "I don't need to." I looked at the cameras. Because justice isn't always about proving who is guilty. Sometimes it's about proving who refused to stay silent. The silence after that was heavier than applause. Joshua turned and left, the sound of his shoes echoing down the hallway, fading into the kind of distance that doesn't shrink when measured by steps. After the reporters dispersed, I stayed behind to sign the final verification pages. The lawyer placed the last folder in front of me. "It's done," he said quietly. "No one can undo it without your consent, and you've written that consent to expire with your heartbeat." "Good," I said. "Let what I built end honestly." He hesitated. "Do you want to issue a formal statement to the press?" I shook my head. "No. The act is the statement." That evening I walked through town, unrecognized by most. The street lights were flickering on, one by one. I passed the diner, the library, the old shop where it had all begun. The air smelled faintly of motor oil and rain. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. When I reached the lake, the water was perfectly still. My reflection looked older, yes, but unburdened. I knelt and touched the surface. The ripple expanded outward until it vanished into the dusk. In that moment, I realized that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sighs. Tomorrow, the world would call me foolish. They'd say I'd lost everything. But I knew the truth. I'd finally owned my life. The town woke before dawn. By sunrise, the headlines were already printed. Local industrialist donates entire fortune. Some called it noble. Most called it madness. But by the time opinion caught up, the act was already law. Joshua spent the morning calling lawyers. They confirmed what I told him: the transfers were complete, irrevocable, witnessed. Every clause airtight. He came to the house at noon, rain on his coat, desperation where confidence used to live. "You've ruined everything," he said. "No," I answered. "I've repaired what was broken. You just don't like what honest looks like." He searched my face for anger and found none. Rage would have comforted him. Forgiveness frightened him. "I did it for the company," he whispered. "Then the company has been repaid in full," I said. "Now go build something that doesn't require blood." He left without another word. The door shut softly, the first quiet truth between us in years. That evening, I walked to the lake again. The wind moved across the water like breath over glass. Somewhere behind me, the town bells marked the hour, ordinary as ever. I thought about how easily men mistake legacy for love, wealth for worth. I thought about the curve of the road where the brakes had failed, and how sometimes mercy looks exactly like control regained. The foundation began its work within weeks. Trucks unloaded supplies at a school I'd never visited. A nurse wrote to thank me for equipment she didn't know my name had bought. I kept the letters in a drawer and opened them only when doubt tried to visit. I live now in a small house near the factory's edge. Same lake, smaller view. The air smells of pine and metal and rain. I own little, own nothing, sleep deeply. Joshua has vanished from the papers. Maybe one day he'll understand that justice doesn't always arrive with punishment, sometimes it arrives with absence. I finish each evening the same way, lights low, window open, listening to the machinery hum across the water. It sounds like breathing. It sounds like life continuing. What would you have done in my place? Comment below, share this story, and subscribe for more stories of truth, consequence, and the quiet kind of justice.